You see, there is something deliciously mischievous about this whole spiritual affair. People come and say, I've meditated, I've read the right books, I've had that sudden vanishing into everything. And almost in the same breath they whisper, why am I still so alone? Why can't I find someone to love? I don't laugh to belittle the ache. I laugh because they've stepped squarely onto the punchline of a very refined joke. One realizes one is the entire universe in this particular costume, and then frets about having no company for Saturday night. A wave wakes to the fact that it is water, and at once becomes anxious about not having another wave to court. That is the humor of it. But here is the point to hear with care. This sense of being outside the ordinary romances is not a fault in the machinery. It's a feature. Once the eyes adjust to daylight, pretending it is midnight becomes rather uncomfortable. And when you understand this, you discover that what you called a problem is a doorway opening onto something far more interesting than what you left behind. So let's speak of love, of real love, and of why, after awakening, the old version no longer fits. The first thing to see plainly is that what most of us call love is often something else entirely. It resembles a contract, a counter with price tags, where two hungry ghosts measure one another's capacity to fill the holes they dare not face. We were raised on the legend of the other half, a hauntingly tender myth that we were born incomplete and must quest for the missing shard. It's a story told so artfully that millions believe it without ever questioning the premise. Thus we move through life as if through a marketplace, polishing our packaging, rehearsing the right lines, practicing the right smile, and living with the private terror of being left on the shelf like unfashionable merchandise. In that theater, a certain kind of love is staged. Two people, each convinced of their insufficiency, wagering on the other as a life raft. For a while, it produces the most convincing magic, fizzing intoxication, sleepless nights, a mind that loops one name like a refrain. We call it falling in love, and the phrase is exact, falling as if into a pit, as if love were an accident that befalls us, rather than a way of being we embody when we are clear. And the fuel of this fall, if you examine it under a steadier light, is very often not love, but need, raw, urgent need. The mad dash from the austere encounter with oneself. The requirement that someone certify our worth and witness our existence. On the surface, it is gorgeously romantic. Letters, vows, grand gestures. Underneath, it is two people employing each other as flotation devices against an imagined drowning. Then one day, very quietly, something opens. You start to see the stitches. You notice how much of what you once called passion was anxiety in evening wear, how much of your devotion was a bundle of unspoken contracts. I'll be what you want if you'll be what I want. I'll soothe your terror if you will soothe mine. And once you've seen it, you can't not see it. It's like watching a magician after someone's shown you the trick. You may still applaud the dexterity, but you are no longer fooled. The rabbit was in the hat all along. This is why the awakened find it so difficult to fall in the old way. It is not that they've gone cold. If anything, they've become more exquisitely sensitive. But they can no longer join the collective hypnosis we call romance. They see the wires holding up the stage, hear the hidden gears turning in the wings. They know that many of our most ravishing love songs are beneath the moonlight, ballads to need, and then something stranger and truer dawns. The emptiness you fled turns out not to exist in the way you imagined. The tale of the missing half, of the unbearable loneliness, was only ever a tale retold so persuasively that you arranged your life to avoid meeting it head-on. In fact, you are not a fragment awaiting repair. You are the whole thing, the universe self-aware in this playful configuration. You are already enough, which is simply to say, you are already what you are. To imagine that you need another to become water is like a wave insisting it requires a second wave to be wet. It is already water. It has never been otherwise. When this is no longer a slogan but a felt knowing reaching into your marrow, a quiet shift occurs. The frantic hunger softens. You stop scanning every room for saviors. You stop measuring each encounter by its potential to deliver completion. for you are not seeking completion any longer. You are standing as completion. Of course, freedom arrives with a price tag. The price is that you can't act the old part convincingly. You can't feign being swept away once you recognize how the wind machine works. And from here, a different sort of loneliness may arise, not the loneliness of being physically alone, which becomes rather simple, even sweet, hours with a cup of tea and birdsong, perfectly content. No, it is the loneliness of the one who sees the game while most are still delightfully absorbed in it. Like an adult among children at a party, the children are splendid, wholly immersed in their play, and you, even wishing to, cannot believe in the game with their devotion. But do not be disheartened. At the moment you stop calling need love, a new doorway opens. On the other side is a love that does not run on bargaining, that does not ferment in lack. It doesn't need to cling in order to stand, any more than water needs permission to be water. It simply is clear, unpremeditated, luminous waiting to discover how it pours itself through you when you have no agenda but truth. Let us look with a cooler, kinder eye at what passes for love in the ordinary marketplace. We have been rehearsing for this play since childhood. The lines about finding the one, the choreography of pursuit and retreat, the swelling music when two characters finally clasp hands as if they had located the missing screw that holds the universe together. Except notice the premise upon which the drama depends. It assumes that you, as you are insufficient equipment for life. It treats the human being as a broken appliance, rattling and sparking until the correct replacement part arrives from the catalogue. We even learn to speak this way. You complete me, as though one were a chair with a missing leg. Charming, yes, also a little macabre. So, naturally, if we've swallowed this story whole, we approach relationships as bargain seekers. We polish our packaging. We price our virtues. We hide our dents behind tasteful lighting. And we browse the aisles, alert for sales and scarcity, terrified of being left in the clearance bin after the season changes. In such a bazaar, one does not meet a living mystery. One appraises inventory. One does not listen. One negotiates. I'll offer loyalty if you supply reassurance. I'll contribute admiration if you deliver attention. I'll refrain from revealing this tender flaw if you promise not to touch that tender scar. A transaction, however scented with roses, remains a transaction. Now, transactions are not wicked. If you want shoes, trade money for leather. Quite sensible. But the trouble begins when we confuse bartering with love. In love as bargain, the central motive is not wonder but fear, the fear of being no one without a mirror to confirm one's outline. The fall into love, so heady and operatic, is often the psyche's desperate lunge toward a life raft. Think of the speed of it, the way the mind composes a novel from a glance, assigns the stranger a set of savior-like properties, and begins to live inside a world produced by its own projection. The letters, the vows, the exquisite ache, these may be beautiful, and I don't advise despising beauty. I'm only asking you to check the fuel mixture. If the engine is running primarily on need, it will sputter the moment need is not met on schedule. To see this is not to become cynical. It is to become honest. For what is the typical arc of a romance that begins in mutual starvation? First, the intoxicating banquet, where each offers the other the precise flavor of validation they have been yearning for. You think, at last I am seen, therefore I exist. Then as the weeks peel away, the menus change. You discover that the other is not a restaurant built for your appetite. They have their own hunger, their own timings, their own unadvertised allergies. You find that you are less in love with the person than with the person's effect on your nervous system. And when the effect wanes, panic creeps in like a draft under the door. So bargaining intensifies. Rules appear. Expectations are carved. Resentments sharpen. What was once a dance becomes a ledger. If all this sounds unromantic, consider that it is precisely the unexamined romanticism that makes us suffer. We were taught to prefer fever to clarity, dramatic hunger to quiet nourishment. We learned to treat longing itself as proof of love, as though intensity guaranteed truth. But any violin can be tuned to ache if you tighten the strings enough. The question is not whether you feel deeply, it is whether the depth is clear water or a very beautiful swamp. The pattern becomes simpler to understand when you bring need into the light. Need says, I cannot bear the encounter with my own aloneness. Give me distraction, give me meaning, give me a plot so I don't have to sit in the formlessness. Need says, prove that I matter by organizing your life around me. Prove that I am lovable by desiring me on cue. And the other, if similarly hungry, agrees. For a while, you hold each other's ghosts at bay. But ghosts are tireless, and invoices fall due. Eventually, the labor of keeping the bargain becomes the relationship's entire occupation. Two secretaries working overtime to file each other's terror. What is love when it isn't a bargain? We will speak of that in due course. For now, it is enough to notice how frequently we call love the relief from an inner pressure. You see a face, and you feel your body uncoil, your mind stop clenching, your history step aside and let the sun in. You think, this person is doing that to me, perhaps. Or perhaps your body simply relaxed because it recognized in that moment that it was safe to be itself. If you attribute your safety to the other's presence, you will need their presence as a drug. And the trouble with drugs is not that they feel good, but that they soon insist upon themselves. You lose the freedom to be well without them. To say it plainly, when love is a transaction, the other is a means. That is the very definition of not seeing. In such seeing as use, you look past the person toward what you hope they will deliver. Status, security, constant praise, an alibi for not meeting your own life directly. The person remains, in practice, invisible, because you are staring at your own wish, projected onto their surface like a film. This is why our declarations so often sound like negotiations conducted to the music of violins. I love you, meaning I love the way I feel when you behave. I can't live without you, meaning I can't tolerate my unmedicated thoughts. Again, there is no need to become grim about this. It is simply what we tend to do until we don't. Part of growing up spiritually is recognizing how thoroughly we conflate nourishment with anesthesia. We ask relationships to feed us and to numb us simultaneously. When the feeding is delicious, we applaud. When the numbing fails, we accuse. But one cannot be both awake and anesthetized. So, if you are serious about awakening, the request that a partner continually numb, you must eventually be withdrawn. Not out of duty, but because it is incompatible with the taste of truth. Here is an odd mercy. When you see that you were bartering all along, you needn't condemn yourself. You can bow to the tremendous intelligence of the organism that tried to keep you from drowning by clutching at anything that floated by. You can thank the bargains for getting you this far, and then, with the same tenderness, you can retire them. As the bargains relax their grip, you begin to meet people as they are, rather than as potential suppliers in your private economy. Meeting becomes a form of listening rather than a hunt. Curiosity replaces the hustle for control. And you discover that interest is a far quieter, more spacious music than obsession. But let's not skip the middle. Between bartering and meeting, there is a valley we all must cross. The valley where the old fuels run out and the new fire hasn't quite caught. In that valley, the familiar rush of falling may no longer convince, and you may fear that love itself has abandoned you. It hasn't. What has faded is the ability to be fooled by your own need. You can still be moved, but the movement is clean. You can still feel desire, but the desire does not carry a contract in its pocket. You can still say yes, but it is not a yes to being rescued, it is a yes to reality. This person, this moment, without mortgage or lien. So when next you feel the great surge, the quickening pulse, the galloping mind, pause and check. Is this love? Or is this the organism rushing to soothe something I refuse to sit with? There is no shame if it is the latter. Sit a while. Breathe. Let the body discover that it can survive a wave of loneliness without reaching for a body to plug the hole. Watch how the wave rises and falls like any other weather. Then, if you still wish to move toward the person, go without the ghost of a bargain trailing behind you like a creditor. For when need is no longer pretending to be love, love has room to be what it is. There is a peculiar mercy and a peculiar mischief in clear seeing. It doesn't ask your permission. It simply arrives like dawn slipping through a careless curtain. One moment you are enthralled by the theater, velvet, violins and vows, and the next you notice the pulley above the balcony, the scuff marks on the stage hand sipping tea behind the curtain. You haven't become superior. You've just been introduced to the backstage. And once you've had the tour, it's impossible to clap quite the same way when the rabbit appears from the hat. Not because the rabbit isn't delightful, because delight no longer requires deception. This is where many feel stranded. They say, if I can't be bewitched, can I still be moved? Yes, more than ever. But the movement changes temperature. It is less fever and more firelight. Less storm, more spring. The drama of romance depends on mutual hypnosis. I'll pretend you are my long-lost completion if you'll pretend I am yours. When the trance thins, the old lines lose their voltage. Compliments sound like currency. Promises feel like props. You're not cynical. You're simply allergic to pretending. Allow me to translate some of this into the everyday grammar of the body. Much of what we called love was our nervous system seeking regulation. As children, we learned accurately that proximity to certain faces calmed us and distance alarmed us. We built attachment styles the way trees grow toward light, anxiously reaching for sun that might withdraw at any moment, or avoidantly toughening the bark so that lightning could not strike the heart. Later, we mistook the familiar surge of "will you stay?" or the familiar chill of "don't get too close" for the voice of love itself. In truth, it was often the body rehearsing an old survival song. Seeing the wires means you begin to catch the song as it starts. The anxious melody hums, answer now, or I'll disappear. The avoidant drum taps, retreat now, or I'll be devoured, before you danced automatically. Now, you hear it and you pause. You put a hand on your own chest, not as a performance, but as an act of rudimentary kindness, and you say, we're safe. Breath descends like a lift to the ground floor. Shoulders forgotten up near the ears. Remember gravity and come home. And in that remembering, the other person is permitted to be what they are, a person, not a pharmacy. This is not the end of romance, it is the end of being run by it. You can still feel the quickening around someone. You simply don't outsource your basic regulation to their replies and silences. You may still long. You do not make longing a hostage situation. To stand in this cleaner space is to discover that so much of relationship turbulence was a weather system generated by your own refusal to sit with weather. When you can shelter your own nervous system, sometimes with breath, sometimes with a walk, sometimes with a cup of ordinary tea, the storm reduces from destiny to climate. You stop reading clouds as prophecies and begin to read them as clouds. But won't that make me detached? Only from the compulsion to use. It makes you exquisitely available to reality. When you are not frantic for the other to be a sedative or a certificate, you can finally perceive them. The way they listen when you stumble, the way they guard their tenderness with a joke, the way their eyes go distant when they speak of a certain year. This is not commodity evaluation, this is reverence. Hypnosis sees what it wants. Reverence sees what is. Notice, too, how the wires reveal themselves in timing. The trance says, now or never, decide at once, intensify. Clear seeing smiles and says, there is time. Not the dawdling of fear, but the patience of truth. When something is real, it can withstand a night's sleep, a week's quiet, a month of not pressing. You can let the bread rise. You can let the seed go dark in the soil. You can discover whether the connection breathes on its own without you fanning it to keep your hands warm. And if you do choose to say yes to someone, it is a new yes. Not the old yes that smuggled in 1,000 hidden clauses, but a plain yes offered today, for today. This yes carries no demand that they rescue your past or guarantee your future. It is a yes to being with them exactly as they are, which paradoxically is the only environment in which growth is not a performance. Where there is no requirement to be medicine, we are free to be human. And when we are free to be human, healing happens as a side effect of truth. Of course, habit persists. You will still catch yourself composing little scripts. How they should text, how they should interpret, how they should feel at precisely 7:03 p.m. on a rainy Thursday. Smile when you notice. Do not scold the mind for trying to build a nest out of control. Whisper to it, "Beloved, the branch holds without our clenching." Then look again. If you still wish to reach, reach gently, openly, without turning your hand into a hook. Understand, seeing the wires doesn't mean dismantling the theater. We still need stories, music, candles, and laughter. It means you no longer confuse stagecraft with love. Love can use a stage, but love is not the stage. Love can borrow language from poetry, but love isn't the poem. Love is the silent fact beneath the speaking, the simple recognition that here is another expression of the same ocean, arriving in a shape you will never fully understand. When you meet them without a contract, the meeting itself becomes the romance. And the wires, far from spoiling the show, are simply part of the marvelous machinery by which truth reveals itself as form. There comes a moment, often without trumpets, when the sentence, "I am enough," stops being a self-help sticker and becomes a plain description of weather. You look out from your own eyes, and there is no one missing. The room is not crowded, and it is not empty. It is as it is, and you are as you are, which is to say, whole. This is not arrogance. Arrogance is an inflated balloon nervously guarding its air. Wholeness is a stone at the bottom of a river, dense, simple, unafraid of currents. When this weight arrives, need loosens its fingers. The old radar that scanned every horizon for rescue idles, like a machine finally switched off. Silence ceases to be an enemy. It becomes a landscape. In that landscape, you discover a different appetite. Before, hunger prowled the edges of every encounter. Confirm me, fix me, fill me. Now, curiosity pads in softly. Who are you, really, when neither of us is afraid? Where there was a script, there is a listening. Where there was an audition, there is a meeting. You begin to enjoy the startling ordinariness of being a bowl of fruit in afternoon light, the clean click of a door closing, your own breath taking its time. And you find that joy, when it does not have to perform, is shy and abundant, like deer at the forest's edge. If you move gently, it approaches. But freedom charges a fee at the door, and it is not negotiable. The first fee is that you cannot convincingly play your old character anymore. You can, of course, recite the lines, laugh on cue, withhold on cue, suffer on cue, but the body knows when the music is canned. Your tongue tastes the tin. The price of seeing the stagecraft is that the old melodramas no longer ring true. You can't unknow what you know. You can't pretend that bargaining is devotion or that adrenaline is intimacy. And if you do forge ahead, the body will protest. It will tighten, ache, fog, or refuse to warm. The organism keeps a strict ledger with reality. Another fee: some doors close when you stop needing what lives behind them. Entire neighborhoods of conversation retire themselves. You find you can no longer spend an evening trading complaints as a form of belonging, or competing over who is more unlovable as a badge of closeness. There is a species of fellowship that thrives on shared anesthesia. You become a poor drinking buddy for that. Not because you think you're above anyone, please. That is only another costume, but because your system no longer metabolizes the old intoxication. You may still visit. You cannot live there. Then there is grief, a quiet tax that freedom levies. You will grieve the fantasies that used to lift you like balloons. You will grieve the version of yourself who believed rescue was just one kiss away, one perfect alignment of stars, one ideal calendar shared with an ideal soul. Don't rush this funeral. Those dreams kept you company when you knew no better. They deserve flowers. Sit down with them at dusk. Thank them for their service. Let them go. Freedom is not the absence of tenderness for what once sustained you. Freedom is tenderness that no longer requires hallucination. If you are honest, you will also notice a social cost. When you are not running the old software, some people won't know where to plug in. They will interpret your steadiness as disinterest, your boundaries as rejection, your lack of panic as lack of passion. Remember, in a culture that confuses turbulence with aliveness, calm looks suspicious. You needn't defend yourself. You need only be intelligible to truth. Those who are meant to read you will learn your alphabet. Those who need the old weather will keep chasing storms. There is no blame in this. Each nervous system moves at its own pace toward the climate that suits it. The most confronting fee, perhaps, is that wholeness renders you ineligible for the old excuses. When you no longer need someone to complete you, you also lose the alibi that says, I cannot be free until they behave. That is a stark liberty. It puts the steering wheel in your lap. Many reject it, preferring the reliable misery of outsourced responsibility. But if you accept it, you become available to a life that is not deferrable. You stop waiting for permission slips. You notice that the moments you wanted to be more real were always as real as they needed to be. Only your bargaining made them foggy. And yet, lest this sound like an austere monastery of one, know that wholeness is not a vow of isolation. Wholeness loves to play. It dances, it flirts, it laughs at the kitchen sink, it writes the text and forgets to be strategic about timing. It takes the long walk for the simple pleasure of walking next to someone whose gait you enjoy. But the play is clean. It does not ask the other to lie against your cracks like mortar. It does not demand that a kiss certify your existence. It does not convert every silence into a verdict. When you are full, companionship is dessert, not bread, which is why it tastes so surprisingly sweet. How practically does this fullness show itself? You find that desire can rise without commandeering. You can want and not clutch. You can be chosen and not swell. You can be left and not diminish. You can say no without rehearsing a prosecution, and say yes without signing a lifetime lease. You bring your presence as an offering, not a hook. You leave the windows open. If the wind wants to visit, it will. If it doesn't, the room is still fresh. And love? Love begins to reintroduce itself not as a surge, but as a clarity. Not as a mission, but as a manner. It is how your eyes rest on a face. It is how you place a cup on the table. It is the refusal to make a person carry what only awareness can hold. In this sense, freedom's price is also its dividend. By relinquishing the theater, you recover the world. The ordinary becomes articulate. The other becomes visible. You become at home. You will be tempted on difficult days to think you have lost something, your capacity for romance, your susceptibility to magic. You haven't. What has melted is your willingness to confuse anesthesia for magic. The magic that remains is wilder and more domestic. A kitchen that smells of toast, a hand that knows where to rest, a conversation in which nobody wins because nothing is at stake. You will find that this sorcery asks only one sacrifice, the sacrifice of pretending. The price of freedom, then, is the end of make-believe. The gift of freedom is that nothing real is taken from you, only the strain of keeping illusions alive. And when the strain stops, love has a chance to become what it has always been underneath the bargaining, the natural warmth of being that does not ask to be paid back for shining. There is a loneliness that comes not from absence, but from surplus of clarity. Imagine, if you will, arriving at a carnival where the mirrors are delightfully warped. Everyone is laughing, swooning at their elongated legs and tiny heads, taking the distortions for enchantment. You don't despise the fun, you simply happen to be carrying a plain mirror. Hold it up and the giggles falter. Not because laughter is wrong, but because the joke has changed. This, more than anything, describes the peculiar solitude that follows awakening. It isn't that the room is empty. It's that you cannot quite pretend with the same enthusiasm that the room is what everyone says it is. Hence the image of being an adult at a children's party. The children are not foolish. They are immersed. They believe the cardboard crown confers a kingdom, that the plastic sword can wound a dragon, that the cake must be cut at exactly the moment the song ends or the spell will fail. One might envy the totality of that belief. And yet, try as you might, your hands won't quite lift the toy sword with conviction. You can play, oh yes, you can play, but you cannot make the play do the work it once did. It won't anesthetize. It won't certify. It won't carry the freight of your existence. The party has not become bad, it has become transparent. Transparency has consequences. You begin to see the plot of the romance before the first act, the hooked attention, the mutually flattering guesses, the first misalignment politely ignored, the negotiation disguised as openness, the ledger quietly opened in the mind where kindnesses and failures are tallied against a fantasy of how it should have gone. Once you've watched this play enough times from the balcony, you learn the cues. And learning the cues makes it very difficult to hurl yourself headlong into the orchestra pit for the sake of drama. You can still be surprised by a human being, thank heaven, but you're no longer surprised by the machinery of bargaining. This is the loneliness. Your refusal to knock yourself unconscious for the taste of intensity. Now we come to the raised standard. The world, bless it, does not generally train us for meetings that are not transactions. We are taught to be charming or useful, interesting or soothing. We are rarely taught to be real. After awakening, the appetite shifts. Charm is lovely, but it no longer functions as a passport. Wit is delicious, but it will not substitute for presence. Beauty glitters, but it will not serve as collateral for truth. What attracts you, increasingly, is the unadvertised quality of a person who doesn't need you to be a role in their cure. Someone whose nervous system does not attempt to draft yours as a regulator of last resort. Someone who can remain themselves while loving you, and who leaves you free to remain yourself while loving them. This is asking a great deal, which is why the field narrows. You are not disqualifying people. You are discovering, with a certain tenderness, that not many are interested in this particular sport yet. It is not a better sport, merely a later one played without helmets, without theatrics, without the roar of a crowd. You want not thunder, but weather, not fireworks, but flame. You want a life that can be lived on a Tuesday afternoon when nobody is watching. It turns out that many romances collapse precisely there in the unremarkable middle, where nothing is performing, and the reality of two lives must find a rhythm that does not depend on applause. If rarity breeds solitude, it also breeds discernment. You stop interpreting compatibility as the seamless overlap of habits, playlists, or weekend preferences. You start noticing subtler coherences, whether silence between you dilates or contracts, whether truth costs either of you your face, whether repair happens without a courtroom, whether no is received without making love disappear from the room. You wonder, very practically, whether your presence makes each other more available to reality. If the answer is yes, you have discovered chemistry of a very different order, the kind that doesn't incinerate you to prove it exists. Let us be candid. In the raised standard climate, many potential connections will not proceed beyond the first or second weather report. The old you would have taken this as evidence of unlovability. The you that knows wholeness reads it as accurate mapping. Not every harbor fits your keel. Not every wind is meant to be ridden. You find a courtesy that wasn't available when you were starving. You can say, this doesn't fit, without turning the other into an error. And you can hear this doesn't fit without turning yourself into a deficiency. This is one of the unexpected luxuries of not needing the other to certify your existence. You can honor their truth without asking it to impersonate your hope. Still, there are evenings when the standard feels like a citadel you've built around a very tender garden. You will ask yourself whether you've become too exacting, whether you are guarding against life under the banner of discernment. This is a good question. The difference, as ever, is felt in the body. If your standard makes you small, brittle, and defended, it is a wall erected by fear. If it makes you spacious, kind, and available to surprise, it is a boundary drawn by love. Love's boundaries are oddly porous. They keep out what isn't true while letting life roam as it pleases. And if you do meet someone who has also seen the wires, the recognition is not trumpet and confetti. It is relief. You feel the subtle exhale of two organisms that don't have to perform medicine for each other. There is nothing to save and nothing to sell. Interest replaces urgency. Pace becomes a shared art. You are not spared difficulty. Nothing real spares you, but the difficulty is workable because neither of you is trying to bend reality into a personal anesthesia. Conflict doesn't mean the contract is in danger, because there is no contract to threaten. It means two truths are rubbing together to find a larger truth that includes them both. I will not romanticize the rarity. It is real. The culture of bargaining is vast, and holidays are built upon it. You will walk through rooms where the main currency is flattery and the price of admission is a little self-forgetting. You will be tempted, for warmth's sake, to pay it. On some nights you will, and you will taste the old sugar on your tongue and remember why you stopped. The memory will not scold you. It will simply whisper, there is another kind of feast, and you are learning to cook. The dishes of that feast are simple: attention, permission, time. They will not always be available in the market, which is why your kitchen matters. So the loneliness stays, but it changes timbre. It becomes less like exile and more like a hilltop. From there you can see several parties at once, and you can choose sometimes to visit, sometimes to walk the ridge alone, sometimes to sit by a fire with the one or the few who know how to keep silence company. The standard remains raised, not as a punishment to the world, but as a hymn to the truth. And in that hymn, you discover a paradox sweeter than any bargain. The more faithfully you refuse to settle for untruth, the more available you become to all the ways love is already everywhere, waiting to be met by someone who does not need it to pretend. There is a moment every evening when the light withdraws its commentary and the room admits what it really is. In that moment you may feel the old ache arrive, punctual as a tide. No story, just a pressure, like a kettle beginning to hum. This is when the bargain hunter inside you used to reach for a phone, a fantasy, or a familiar doorway where someone would lend you their attention like a blanket. Now you stand and watch the steam rise, not because you enjoy suffering, but because the night deserves a witness who does not immediately trade it for neon. To stand alone is not an indictment of the world, it is a courtesy to reality. It is saying to the vastness, I am here, and I will not force you to shrink to the size of my fear. There is a dignity in that posture, quiet, unphotogenic, the kind that doesn't trend because it refuses to make company a narcotic. Solitude, stripped of dramatics, turns out to be spacious rather than punitive. The room keeps its shape, your life keeps its weather. And you discover that the ache you feared was a black hole is more often an unopened letter. If you stay, it opens. If you bolt, it remains sealed and will seek you tomorrow with the same patient handwriting. Very poetic, you say, but what do I do with my hands? Ah, yes, the hands. They reveal our theology more honestly than our words. Let the hands move in small, truthful devotions. Wash a plate until it is simply a plate again, not a prop in the story of your worth. Fold a shirt as if the body that will wear it were beloved because it is and because it will be, whether or not another pair of eyes approves. Open a window and let the night revise the air. Put water to boil and listen to the ordinary percussion of a lid rattling. There is a music for those who have stopped trying to drown it with symphonies. None of this proves anything. That is why it works. The hands teach the heart how to remain without a plot. Tending the long night also means learning how to let your nervous system graze rather than gorge. When loneliness surges, the old reflex seeks an extreme more noise, brighter screens, bigger flavors of anything. Experiment with smaller doses of presence. Sit on the floor and feel how the spine finds its own agreement with gravity. Breathe as though you were trying not to disturb a sleeping child in the next room. Place the palm lightly over the sternum and give the animal body one unambiguous signal. Safe. Not because a partner has arrived, not because the future has announced itself, but because the room, as it is, does not currently contain a tiger. The body, told the truth in simple language, begins to trust you more than your dramas. You will be tempted to turn solitude into a project, as if you were training for some spiritual decathlon. See if you can resist making it impressive. Cook enough for yourself without pretending you are hosting a mythic banquet or performing self-care for an imaginary audience. Read a page and stop when the sentence lands. You needn't prove literacy to the furniture. Walk when walking is walking, not mileage toward a future where loneliness is extinct. If love is to arrive, let it find you living, not rehearsing, living. There is another art worth practicing, the art of not prosecuting the world for what it didn't promise. Night is not a betrayal by daylight, it is the other half of the agreement. Likewise, the absence of a lover this evening is not evidence against love, it is the way space keeps the place set. If you can bless the empty chair without filling it with imaginary guests, something softens in the air. Gratitude, that unfashionable sacrament, returns not as a posture but as a sensation of being allowed to breathe and be among things that are minding their own exquisite business. Of course, there will be nights when the ache is not a polite visitor but a weather system. On such nights, take your body outside the confines of your thoughts. Let your feet learn the lazy grammar of a neighborhood at dusk. Let the trees, who have never hurried a leaf in their lives, explain timing to you without a single sentence. If tears come, they are not indictments, they are irrigation. You are not failing at awakening if you would like a hand to hold. You are simply human, which is the only shape awareness has ever bothered to carve for love to touch. If music helps, choose the kind that doesn't lie, the kind that lets silence keep some of its territory. If words help, write them by hand and resist mailing them to anyone. A letter can be true without becoming postage. It is astonishing how much of our urgency to declare is the nervous system trying to outsource its regulation. When you catch that move, smile. Wrap the letter in string. Place it in a drawer like a seed you are not obliged to plant. As you practice this gentle fidelity to what is, you'll notice that a loan morphs from a verdict into a location. It has a certain light, a certain echo, even a certain fragrance you begin to recognize at the door, fresh bread if you've been kind, stale smoke if you've been bargaining. You learn to air the room. You become suspicious of your own drama and devoted to your own aliveness. The distinction matters. Drama exhausts without deepening. Aliveness deepens without exhausting. Both make noise. Only one makes roots. People will still pass through. Invitations will still appear. You are not renouncing the banquet. You are learning to recognize food. And when you do eat conversation, kiss, shared Sunday errands, you can taste without devouring. It is a miracle how much closer people may come when they are not being asked to plug a hole. They relax, you relax. Friendship, that underrated country, expands its borders and quietly includes eros without needing to annex it. If none of this sounds glamorous, good. Glamour is the costume loneliness uses to sneak back into your house through the chimney. What we are speaking of is humbler. A chair pulled close to a window, a lamp that knows when to be turned off, a human being consenting to the portion given this evening and discovering that it is improbably sufficient. From such sufficiency, the world becomes companionable again. The kettle and the night conspire to keep you. And when sleep comes, it isn't conquest, it's a shoreline. You lie down not as a refugee from lack, but as someone who belongs to the ocean that breathes through every wave, partnered or unpartnered, held either way. By now you may suspect that love, when it no longer trades in anesthesia, stops behaving like a lottery and begins to feel like weather. You cannot force it to arrive, and you need not force it to stay. You make a life in which it would be welcome, a life with doors that open easily, with windows that don't stick, with a table that has room for one more bowl, and then you attend to your day. If love comes, it finds you living. If it does not, you are still living. The center of gravity has shifted from outcome to presence. What does it look like to love from fullness rather than from lack? It is simpler than we imagine and more demanding than we prefer. Fullness loves without secretly auditioning the future. It does not treat today as the trial run for a permanent role. It lets a morning be a morning, a kiss be a kiss, a conversation be a small boat that crosses only the water it can cross. There is care, yes, and attention, but there is no mortgage hidden in the wallpaper. You do not extract promises to calm your ghosts. You meet what is here without obligating it to become what is not. From fullness, attraction still happens. Desire still lights its lanterns. But these flares no longer blind you. You can want without worship, enjoy without claiming, and step closer without turning the other into a shrine. Possessiveness, so often marketed as devotion, begins to look like fear in formal wear. You can feel the difference in the hand itself. A grasp hooks and closes, a holding cups and breathes. To love is to hold, and holding, when it is true, contains the possibility of release. You will find that language changes. Prove it softens into show me who you are. Promise me becomes tell me what's true now. Forever relaxes into let's practice today well enough that tomorrow can recognize it. This is not a retreat from commitment. It is the only ground from which commitment is not theater. When two people stand in their own lives they are not trying to escape. Agreement has dignity. It is a path you walk, because walking together enlarges the sky, not because walking alone terrifies you. Conflict inevitably visits. In bargain love, conflict signals threat to the contract, and we lawyer up, arguing our case, revising history, calling witnesses from old grievances. In fullness love, conflict is a messenger. It says, there is something here that wants more truth. Perhaps a boundary was unclear. Perhaps a fear was unspoken. Perhaps two values, both honest, are rubbing to find a new living fit. You can raise your voice if you must, but you needn't raise your weapons. You defend the connection by defending reality, not your image. Apologies arrive sooner, not because you are eager to lose, but because you have lost interest in winning at the cost of seeing. And yes, uncertainty remains. Fullness love does not counterfeit guarantees. It offers presence instead. The one thing that was missing all along. You sit together in the unknowable and discover that this, too, is companionship, the shared willingness to belong to a day whose ending neither of you controls. Oddly, this makes the day more vivid. Food tastes like food when it is not tasked with feeding your eternity. Bodies become bodies, again astonishing arrangements of breath and warmth when they're not required to carry the entire weight of your salvation. There will be voices, internal and external, that call this cold, that confuse the absence of bargaining with the absence of depth. They are not your enemies. They are emissaries from an old city where intensity is mistaken for intimacy. Smile at them as you would at friends who still adore fireworks. Then turn back to your small, steady flame. Depth in this climate is not measured by how loudly it roars, but by how quietly it keeps house through the seasons. If no partner appears, if the field, for now, remains a wide, bright, quiet fullness does not collapse. It extends itself sideways. Friendship thickens, craft matures. Service stops being a performance and becomes a natural overflow, like a spring that does not know how not to pour. You become the kind of companion to life that a companion to a person would be lucky to meet. Curious, undemanding, awake. The irony, one too tender to be turned into strategy, is that love tends to find people who are busy loving the world. Not because they've mastered a technique, but because they are easy to join. Should a partner arrive, you recognize them not by the voltage, but by the ease. The body gives you the report. Breath that lengthens, attention that widens, a sense that nothing needs to hurry toward a conclusion to prove that it matters. Recognition is not a spell. It is the absence of a spell. You don't need them to be perfect or to rescue you from weather. You just need them to be themselves while you are yourself, and for both to be willing to keep telling the truth, even when the truth trembles. You move at the pace of honesty, which is to say, sometimes slow, sometimes laughing, sometimes still. Even here, there is loss. People change. Paths fork. Death visits. When love is not a bargain, grief is not an invoice, it is the honor you pay to a reality that mattered. You do not take grief as evidence that fullness failed. Fullness includes grief like the ocean includes storms. It was always a wild contract, to share a life with another mortal. The vulnerability is not a flaw in the design. It is the design that allows beauty to be more than furniture. Let us close the circle. The spiritually awake cannot find love in the usual way because they have ceased to confuse need with love. They won't re-enter the carnival as customers. And so the barkers shout and they smile and keep walking. But love, real, unsold love, is not hiding in some booth. It is what you bring when you arrive as yourself. It is what your presence does to a room when you are not asking the room to be your mirror. It is the quiet radiance of a being that knows it is already home and is therefore free to wander. If love appears in the form of a person, bow and say thank you. If it does not, bow and say thank you. Either way, the ocean remains what it has been all along, and you remain what you have been all along, a wave that has remembered its water. From such remembering, connection is not a strategy, and solitude is not a sentence. They are both forms of the same generosity, the world meeting itself, without the costume of a contract.